What's up everybody? Welcome back to this episode of Home Built Workshop. Today I'm going to use these reclaimed barn boards to make some cool rustic picture frames. So at Christmas time, my brother sent me this awesome box of reclaimed barn boards. They're all about this length just because that's what he could fit in the box, but they're plenty long enough to use for some picture frames. I'm not 100% sure of the species of wood here. I believe it's hemlock. My grandpa had a lot of hemlock milled up quite a while back, and I believe this is some of it. I've got some cool music related posters that I want to build these frames for. Right now one of them doesn't even have a frame, and the other one is just in a cheap big box store poster frame and it needs to be replaced. So let's get to it. My first step will be to rip everything down to the same width. Now I'll readjust the blade and my fence, and making 2 passes over the blade, I'll cut a channel which will hold the picture and the glass. And that really is the majority of the cutting that you need to do to make up the stock, basically removing a little slice here to make a recess to hold the glass and your picture. Now using a table saw is not the only way to cut this recess. Another way you could do it would be to use a straight cutting bit and a router table and run your piece along to cut this recess. Also, if you wanted to go the more traditional route and you have a rabbiting plane, you could use that to cut this joint as well. I don't have one of those, so a router table or a table saw would be the methods that I would use. Although I might have to get a rabbet plane sometime. They look kind of fun to use, so I'd have to try that out. Now I'm just going to grab my miter sled and cut the 45-degree angles to make up the frame. Now the key to a miter sled is that you cut one side of the joint on the left side of the blade and the other side on the right side of the blade. Now one thing I would definitely recommend if you're using a miter sled is to label what side of the blade that you made the cut on. I label mine with a left and the other side with a right. That way you always want to match a left and a right together, and that's kind of the key to the miter sled. Because when you assemble your miter sled, there's a chance that you may not be exactly 45 degrees to the blade on either side, and that's actually okay. It can be just a tiny bit off one way or another, and as long as you cut one side on the left and one side on the right, you're going to get a perfect 90-degree angle. Now if it's off a lot, well, that's just not going to look right, but if it is off a tiny little smidge, not a big deal. So I definitely recommend marking your sides left and right. That way you always match them up and get good joints. Now I can begin gluing these frames up. I'm using one of these band clamps to clamp it all up. They have these cool corner brackets that help keep everything nice and square. I'm just checking the joints to make sure they're flush in the front. Adjust if necessary, clamp it down, and we'll let this dry. Pretty cool. That's all there is to it. Now I'll just give the frames a quick sanding with 220. I don't want to remove the weathered look, but I do want to smooth it out so that there's no splinters. And I'll just clean up these inside corners with the inevitable hand sanding. With the frames all lightly sanded, now I can move on to the finish. For that, I'm going to keep it really simple and just use a coat of Danish oil. The Danish oil will seal and protect the wood. It'll also darken it up a little bit while still retaining that barnwood look that I really like. I wish I had like a tub that I could just fill with Danish oil and dunk the whole thing in. It'd be a lot easier. This wood is so dry, it just sucks up the oil, so it's going to probably take a couple of coats. Now I'll just set those aside to dry and work on cutting the glass. I'm using a piece of 3/32 inch glass that I picked up from the home center. All we need to do is measure it out, mark our sizes, and cut it down. I'm going to use a square as a straight edge. When you make the cut, you want to make one continuous pass. I'm going to put a little piece of wood right underneath the score line. And now, you should be able to just snap it off. Wow, that one snapped right off right away. Well, I'm happy to say I got all the glass cut without cutting myself in the process. One thing I'd like to point out if you're using a glass cutter similar to this is that you need to account for the edge of the frame of the glass cutter. I'm going to use this piece of plywood and draw a mark to try to demonstrate what I'm talking about. If you put a straight edge on that line and then you run your glass cutter along the straight edge, it's not actually going to line up with that line. You're going to be maybe an 1/8 inch or so off because of this thickness right here. So what you need to do is put your glass cutter on your mark and bring your straight edge into the cutter so that it's actually offset from the line. Now I'll just wipe the glass down with some glass cleaner to remove any fingerprints. I'll drop the glass into the frame, add the artwork, and a backer that I cut from some really heavy cardboard. To hold everything in place, I'm going to use this pneumatic tab point tool. Now normally I wouldn't buy a tool like this because I don't do framing very much, but this was a used one and the price was right, so I figured it'd be perfect for this project. You can get manual ones that work similar to a staple gun to fire the tab points into the backing, or you could use something like a finishing nail and just tap them in to hold everything in place. I'm going to use this. You heard that, huh? I just broke the glass. Apparently I got a little too close with the tab point and ended up breaking that piece of glass. Not the end of the world, just a drag because I got everything fitting well. So I'm just going to cut another piece really quick. This is a signed band poster that has some members of the band that are from the area of my hometown. If you've been considering working with glass but maybe have been a little hesitant for one reason or another, I've found that it's not all that hard to work with. The trickiest part is getting a nice even score, and then as soon as you get that, the glass basically will crack right on that score. It's not really that tricky to do. I do recommend wearing gloves and eye protection just to protect yourself in the event that something shatters, and also because the edges of this glass are really sharp and wearing gloves is going to help you not get sliced up. A lot of people use lexan or a plexiglass for frames, which works perfectly fine, and it actually is much easier to work with. You can just make cuts on the table saw and get everything to the size you need. But if you've been wanting to try glass, just get you a glass cutter of some sort. There's several different styles. I can't speak for the other styles, as this is pretty much the only kind I've used, and as long as you get a good score, it works pretty well. The last thing I need to do is install a hanger, and these frames will be complete. I probably should have considered doing this piece before I put the glass in, so I'm going to try to be really careful. And here's my finished frames. I think they turned out really good. I even had enough of the frame stock left over to make a small 5x7, put a picture of my daughter in. I'm very happy with the way these turned out. I love the look of that barn wood, and the Danish oil doesn't change the look of that, but still protects the wood and retains that barn wood look. I really, really like it. Now, one question you may be asking is, why did I not reinforce the miters? A lot of times you can reinforce these with a spline, or there's some other methods that people will use to reinforce the miters. The reason I didn't do that for these particular frames is because they're really light. there's really no weight on them. There's not going to be any sort of heavy artwork or the glass or anything. Nothing in here is really heavy, and I feel like I've got good enough miter joints that the wood glue is going to hold them and they're going to be plenty strong. I have zero concerns that they're going to come apart without being reinforced. Now, if I was going to do something any larger than this, which is a 13 by 18, I definitely would reinforce those joints with a spline or some other method just to make sure that it has plenty of strength as it's hanging on the wall. But again, even this size, it doesn't have a lot of weight, and I'm just not concerned that it's going to come apart. It's going to be just fine. So I hope you guys enjoyed the project. A project like this is really pretty simple to make, and you can definitely customize it to whatever size you need for your artwork or whatever piece you're trying to frame. The sky's the limit as far as what you can use for materials and finish and sizes and all of that. So take the idea, customize it to fit your needs, and have a great time doing it. If you enjoyed it, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Also, links to my website as well as my social media are down below in the description. And don't forget, I do have a second YouTube channel called Inside Home Built Workshop, where I do post some behind the scenes stuff and kind of what's going on in and around the shop. There's also a link down below to that as well. So thanks a lot for watching, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Oh, and I cut it on the wrong side. Ha! Well, that's not gonna work. Helps if you cut it the right way.
Daddy, I made you something that if the glue dries quicker than what we're doing, then you could take this guy when he's dry, and you could take this pokey end, take that side, and then cut the glue open.
Hey, brand new glue bottle's not glued shut. Yeah, good to know. And Chad, you're gonna like this one. Kind of like the pin nailer, but I don't know. It's cool. Well, that's unfortunate. Ah, no breakage. This is a really bright shirt that I'm gonna cut up for rags. It's gotta be the brightest rag known to man. Ow! Son of a, did you see that? Ooh, that hurt. That was not smart.